Glad to see you this morning on behalf of the Vineyard Discipleship Group. We're glad to have many of you that are guests with us today as we enjoy the visit from our special guest, Brenda Wier, whose complete introduction is being shared in the worship services of 9 a.m. and 11:11 today. Brenda is going to have a presentation for us on some history, some forward-looking information as well. And then when she concludes that part of her presentation, she will begin to take your questions. And we ask that if you have a question, you kindly come to the microphone that is here in front of the chancel. And tell Brenda and the gallery who you are, your name, and share your questions so that everybody can hear it. And then return to your seat, and Brenda will do her best to deal. I've teased her the last couple of weeks that she's the most brilliant soothsayer and seer of the future that we have in the Methodist connection. And she responds to me the way she did just then. Rolls her eyes and looks the other way. But she will do the best to give the answer. This is a love gift to you. Neither Brenda and I are uptight about this. We're very confident about our future as United Methodist, and I am very confident about St. John the Apostle United Methodist Church. This is just a gift so that we can be aware, so that we can be prepared, not to be told what to think, but be taught again how to think, which is very much a hallmark of who we are. If you are a part of the Vineyard Discipleship Group, please don't leave this morning without seeing Doug Smith. He has the offering envelope and the clipboard so that you can sign in, and we'll have a good Vineyard registration, and we'll be back next Sunday dealing with the book Soul Keeping, continuing the chapter that we began last week. The Vineyard generously got together and took up a love offering just as a class to thank Brenda for making the trip in from Palo Pinto County and coming to be with us this morning. And Lynn Stokes, you already gave it to her. Okay, well, then you're ready to go. She's gone now. She's got her love offering. Let's thank Brenda Wier this morning as we do that. Brenda is going to come where I am now. She can sit or stand as we move through this time. Brenda, we're again just thrilled to have you. And as she comes, I need a volunteer. I wonder if John Obercrom would help. Would you take this to the business office? It doesn't need to be up here. And there is the key, and I'll receive it. Just lay it on Tim Hammond's desk. That'll be great. Brenda, good morning again.
Thank you. Well, I understand that Mark has briefed you somewhat about the issues before General Conference.
I forgot to say, the handout that we shared back in November that explains everything is available again this morning. If you would like one, lift a hand and Steve Reed will see that they get distributed. If lots of hands go up, then somebody help Steve pass those out. That's the explanation again of what we're doing. Thank you, Brenda.
I want one. I want to see what he's telling you. Yeah, there's a reason for checks and balances. No, I'm just teasing. This great church that John Wesley started, this movement, it wasn't a church, he just started a movement, has grown and grown and grown. And, you know, we Methodists, they give you an inch and we take a mile. It's just like we have made it bigger and bigger and bigger. So a background for some of you all about General Conference. I'll try to do this briefly for those of you all who already know all this stuff. I'm sorry, you have to know it. General Conference is the group that makes all the decisions for the United Methodist Church. We have a book of discipline, and it's an organizational book. As I read the introduction to the book of discipline, it was interesting to read the sentence that the bishops and the writers of the Book of Discipline, wanted to see it as a means of grace in our life together, meaning that the things that were in it would help us be more fruitful and more faithful and more kind of homogeneous in the way we think and do and practice. So that's the Book of Discipline. Many of us have been on the other side, and we feel we don't see it so much as a gift of grace. We see it as a means of grace, but we see it as a bunch of rules and actions that, do we have to deal with this? If you're on the trustees committee, have you read that section that tells you how you have to do everything? The Methodists are very wordy, and if another denomination says to you, oh, you Methodists don't know what you believe, go, oh no, we know what we believe, and it is all written down somewhere. Oh, goodness. We do have a book of resolution that's about twice the size of the Book of Discipline. And these are things from faithful people in our denomination at General Conference that put together our opinion as United Methodist about different things, from euthanasia to social justice, you name it. I think every Sunday school class needs to have a book of resolutions so that if the Sunday school teacher doesn't show up that particular Sunday, you can open it up and say, oh, let's see what we believe about this. And it is all right there. And it's non-binding. The discipline is binding. The book of resolutions are non-binding. And when they pass a resolution at General Conference, it stays in the book for 10 years. And sometimes it gets voted on for another 10 years, and sometimes it goes by the wayside and they make a resolution about something else. So that's the two books of the denomination that we go by and believe and have committed, and we are in covenant together to think along those lines. At General Conference, the bishops do not vote. Think about that. They seem to be the most powerful person in our annual conference and all the conferences. But the bishops, and we think of them as the most powerful. As clergy, our knees, knock together when it comes appointment time, or, what's the bishop going to say if I do this, that, or the other? But the bishops will say to us that they have the least power of anybody in the church. They are there just to be our spiritual leaders, and that at General Conference, every decision that's made about something that goes into the Book of Discipline comes from the people at General Conference. And you too could go to General Conference if you would like. It starts with being elected by your annual conference. When I was first elected in 2004, our annual conference had 12 persons on the delegation. We had 12. Because General Conference, it is stated in our discipline that it will be 1,000, no more than 1,000 persons at the General Conference. And these persons are elected from all of the different annual conferences, and now all over the world. The last time we were elected for the 2016 General Conference, we had 4 representatives. And so you say, how has that changed? Why do we have 12 and now we just have 4? Because Methodism has grown and grown and grown, and we've become a global church, and they appoint an annual conference for the number of persons, the number of Methodists, believing, professing Methodist in your annual conference, then they delegate out. For some reason, they have chosen 893 as the total number of folk that will go to this General Conference, and so they've distributed that out. Now, our U.S. church has gotten a little bit crossways about this, because through Africa and the Philippines and Europe, the church has grown and is on fire. And we look at Africa, and I tell folk that I'm not sure if he was the king or the president of Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, became a United Methodist. He was converted and became a United Methodist. Well, in his kingdom of Côte d'Ivoire, everybody became United Methodist. So, in the Côte d'Ivoire, we have 1 million United Methodists. And so the representation for the Côte d'Ivoire goes along with that. Well, you can begin to see the angst here. Folk are going, but wait a minute, we've had this many representatives, you can't take that away from us, but we give this much money, or we do. Anyway, the Spirit of God. So that's how we get to General Conference. And I have been blessed and humbled for these many years to be on our delegation. And I have to say, have you ever been part of something that it takes you a while to kind of figure it out? How to get along, how to understand it, well, I'm into 16 years now, and I'm still learning. So you can figure out how complicated that is. Back in 1972, the General Conference was held in Denver. And at that General Conference, let me back up. Let me just say, General Conference is for 2 weeks every 4 years, okay? And when you go to General Conference, you are put in legislative committees, and you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you start your work by 7:30 or 8, and it could be 10:30, 11 o'clock at night before you're finished, and you go to bed, and you get up the next day. And I stand by this, that United Methodists, after they have not had any sleep for about 3 or 4 days, are not very nice to each other. So in 1972, with a lot of finagling and back and forth, it's a political process. They use Robert's Rules of Orders. So if somebody stands up and makes a motion, you'll get an amendment, and an amendment to an amendment, and an amendment to the amendment to the amendment, and it's just even hard to keep your mind around it. And some of us go, what does this have to do with being the kingdom, But anyway, that's our process, so we just have to deal with it. In 1972, at a late hour, an amendment to an amendment to an amendment added these words: homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. It came in 1972, that one statement. And so here we are in 2019 already, and in our book of discipline, there are 26 paragraphs that deal with homosexuality. And every year at General Conference after 1972, there would be arguments about this and finagling, and it just got bigger and bigger. Finally, in 2016, the conference said, we've had enough. We're at an impasse. We can't seem to work on anything else except this. Bishops, please help us. Help us get through this impasse and help us see a way forward for our denomination, for those folks that fully agree with that statement and for those folks that disagree with that statement, and all along the spectrum. So what we did, the bishops came back to us and they accepted our challenge. Remember, they can't vote, but they accepted this challenge. And they chose 32 people from across the denomination, male and female, from every ethnic in our church, ethnicity in our church, from Europe to the U.S., to the Philippines. We had bishops, we had lay people, we had clergy. 32 folk came together and committed their lives to 2 years of work on this issue. And after the end of that time period, which is now, and I really do look at that as the process of holy conferencing. I mean, they spent time in prayer and listening and covenanting with one another to hear what you have to say. Not necessarily for you to hear me right now. Help me hear you. If we could use that model in so many ways, what a blessing it would be. I'm one of those that you get into a conversation about some topic and somebody's making their point and I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to counter that? And, yeah, but. And they covenanted. It was a beautiful process. And they said there were times that people could just get so frustrated with what they were doing, but no one ever walked away from the table. That's pretty powerful. for those 32 people over all those years. So what they have done, they have come with 3 plans that General Conference will address. And one plan is called the One Church Plan. And the One Church Plan, the United Methodist Church will remain in connection, upholding the unity of mission without the unity of, what did I say here? Oh, without the unity of practice. Does that make sense to you all? We've got unity of mission, but not uniformity in practice. And what that means is that you pretty much can work in your area, and it's about contextuality. So persons that are on the East Coast can function in one way in the South Central jurisdiction and here as they see fit, as they feel the love of God directing their lives, and we still have what they call in the United Methodist Church that umbrella relationship. And we have always been kind of that way from the times of John Wesley, of being able to allow folk to think for themselves. John Wesley was all about that. Let me just read a quote for you. John Wesley made this statement: "We leave every man," they didn't include women at the time, but girls, we can let that go. Okay, "we leave every man to enjoy his own opinion and to use his own mode of worship, desiring only that the love of God and his neighbor be the ruling principle in his heart and show itself in his life by a uniform practice of justice, of mercy, of faith. And accordingly, we give the right hand of fellowship to every lover of God and man, whatever his opinion or mode of worship be, of which he is to give an account of God." So John Wesley says, ultimately, I'm not going to judge you because you worship differently from me, because you believe something differently from me. Ultimately, that's going to come between you and God. But if you are wholeheartedly in love with God and you serve God, then we shake hands on that and we allow that and celebrate it. That's the gift of the United Methodist Church. I hope I'm not going to shock anybody when I say John Wesley didn't necessarily believe in the virgin birth. Now, it's not that he didn't believe in it, but he didn't draw a line in the sand and say this absolutely happened. And he got in fierce conversations with Whitefield and many others, and he would say, if we are not of one mind, can we be of one heart? If we're not of one mind, can we be of one heart? Can we allow one another the space and freedom to think and to serve that way? So that's John Wesley, that's our basis. Well, we've gotten to General Conference, and I'm just here to tell you, it's pretty contentious. And we get folk, especially from different parts of the world, especially in Africa, where homosexuality can have a sentence of death. So when they're talking about homosexuality, they're saying, church, you can't change this because in our context, this means one thing, something it doesn't even mean for us. While others are saying, my child was baptized in your church. We raised my child in this church. My child now is come out as homosexual, and my church is shunning my child and not accepting my child fully. And when they say fully, they are talking about all the freedoms that we have within the church, and if we'd like to go to seminary and go before the Board of Ordained Ministry to see if we are qualified to become clergy, that's what they're asking for. It's not that a Board of Ordained Ministry would say, okay, we're going to adorn everybody that's homosexual. And y'all, I'm telling you, some people go to extremes, and that's kind of the vision that they have. Well, that's not really it. So that's the One Church Plan. Kind of got that we allow. And in that, a local church wouldn't have to vote on anything. You would continue kind of as you were. Another plan I'm going to talk about is the traditional plan. And this one states that the accountability to the current book of discipline, meaning all of that language, would stay the same, and we would unite on that, or We would ask those congregations, those annual conferences, to leave and maybe to unite with an autonomous affiliated concordant church. And that's simply to say that there are more Methodists in the world than United Methodists. We have Wesleyan Methodist. We have several other expressions of Methodism, but they are not United Methodist. I was visiting a friend one time in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, and their little church, their Methodist church is only open until, I think, the end of August, because then all the snow and the town kind of shuts down. But during the months that it's open, it's a Methodist church, but it's not United Methodist. And it was because in 1968, when we became United Methodist, they chose not to do that. So they would be what we would call an affiliated Methodist church or a concordant Methodist church. So, just saying that, and through the traditional plan, they're asking folk that if you will not adhere to our current discipline, that our pastors cannot preside over a union of same-sex folk, that local churches would not allow that union to take place in their sanctuary. If you cannot go along with that, then you need to gracefully move on. Okay, that's the traditional plan in a nutshell. A lot more about that. I'm not going to get into charges and trials and all the things that go along if you stay with the traditional plan in the church and then you go outside the covenant, as they would say, there. And then the third plan is called the Connectional Conference Plan. Now, this one is a little confusing, and I understand where it came from. It really was trying to allow the most amount of space for folk to be in ministry in their local context. And we would no longer have the Central Texas Annual Conference, but the Central Texas Annual Conference would affiliate with one of the three. And these three conferences, they haven't even given them names, but one would be a reconciling conference where they encouraged and participated in same-sex unions and homosexuality as pastors, all of that kind of thing. Another conference would be the traditional conference, and then the one in the middle would be more like our one church conference that we've just talked about. So a local church and an annual conference would make a decision. I think we're going to go with Conference A. And that would be our annual conference. The bishop of that Central Connectional Conference would make the appointments, all of that kind of thing. But when you start looking at this, it gets really convoluted. So maybe Conference A really is housed in Boston, and you're going to be part of that connectional conference. And there are going to be churches from all over the country and all over the world that are going to relate to the conference in Boston. Gets a little confusing, doesn't it? And you can just well imagine. Plus, there would have to be I think there are 5 constitutional changes. The United Methodist Church, of course, we're so methodical, we even have a constitution and a judicial council. And so what happens then? I'm getting the word. We got to hurry. I'm giving you too much information. Anyway, do you see how convoluted that could be? And it would just go bigger than we can imagine. So I'm really thinking once we get to General Conference, we'll basically be dealing with the one church or the traditional plan. And they're asking us as a General Conference to vote on that. Does that give you some history and kind of you get a basis for what we're doing? I'm going to give you, we're running in, Mark said, 10 till is when we're over, and I'm sorry I've given you so much. If you've got a question, please come forward, and I'll do my best to give you an answer. I'm not, like I said, I'm a work in progress, and so is the General Conference. I'll do my best. Somebody got a question about that?
All right, you presented 3 options. Isn't there a 4th option that's very likely?
And
That do nothing?
And you know, that happened to us in Tampa. We did this work for 2 weeks, and we finally get to the end, and somebody raises their hand and said, "Oh my gosh, is this constitutional? Take it to the Judicial Council." And I'm telling you, in the 11th hour, they came back and said, "Everything you voted on is unconstitutional." Yes, that is an option. We have 3 days. We have 3 days to do this work, and they realized after the bishop said, "We'll come together and we'll deal with this for 3 days," it needs to be a week. I'm already a little bit anxious about that because if that impasse, I don't know. I pray that we will do something. You know, I really do. I pray that we will make some kind of a decision, and then we can begin to move forward. The United Methodist Church is huge. As I talked about all of the agencies and churches and around the world, it will take till 2025 to begin to dismantle all of that. Whatever decisions that we make, anybody else raise your hand and come on up. I'll keep talking. You know, I talk in my sleep, so, you know.
So, as with any kind of governance, it seems that the churches would be most affected by the governance at their local areas, right? So bishops, I think in the context of the United Methodist Church, would certainly have a lot of say-so in what happens in their conference. So has there been any discussion about whatever the plan is that's voted on and chosen, how the bishops will constitute or initiate governance within the locality of their areas?
Oh, absolutely, a very good question. And in this little document that I have here are all of the plans. And we also have 50 petitions that are coming in that they want to perfect the plans with 50. There started out 78, and 23 of those were not constitutional. So we've got 50 that we also have to consider. And in this, it is so intricate that by the book, we will be voting on what the role of the bishop will be, what the role of the district superintendents, the local churches, what you're going to be able to do. It will also have a gracious way to leave the denomination. Each one of these plans gives a way for local churches or conferences that choose to leave. And one of those, and I have to say, on most of those gracious ways to leave the church, there will be something like a 2-year period that you would still continue to pay your apportionments for 2 years. And the reason for that is the incredible amount of unfunded liability that we have for our clergy and staff throughout the church. And this is just a way to say, if these churches decided to up and leave, you know, all of a sudden, we would lose the funds, and we've got to have time to negotiate and how to be responsible and faithful to our commitments for unfunded liability. A thought just came through my head that might be really important for y'all to know. Also on the table would be the property here at St. John's really belongs to the Central Texas Annual Conference. If you all chose today to no longer be United Methodist, you would leave, but all your resources and the building would still be United Methodist. An example, in one of our Midwest conferences, a very large church has already decided to leave the denomination. And so by that rule, they have left, and they left their building, and they owed something over $10 or $12 million in debt. It was a brand new building. It almost bankrupted that annual conference, and that was just one church. So you can see why there has been thought into, as you leave, you still have responsibility to the body that formed you and nurtured you. We've got to figure out a way how to do that. Got it? Everyone will have some form of way to do that. We do have one petition from Keith Boyette that is calling for an immediate demise of the United Methodist Church, you know? And when we leave in February, if we vote on that petition, There's no longer a Methodist church. I kind of don't think that's going to happen, yeah. But we get that kooky kind of stuff all the time, you know. So, any other questions? We will be there for 3 days. It's the end of February. I covet your prayers for all of us, for all of the folk that feel like they have so much at stake. And as I said this morning, I'll probably say it again in the next service, you know, I have a lot of peace about this. My friend that said, you know, we're at a threshold, and we know what's on this side. We don't have a clue what's on the other side, but you know what? God is already there. So that's kind of the way I look at it, and we hope that we can be civil-minded and spend some time in prayer and covenant. Please come forward. We've got a few more minutes, 5 or 6 or 10. I can cut into his time if I want to. I've got the microphone.
My name is Joe Wardell.
Joe?
And I just wondered if the conference does decide to offer the various options and each church can decide, would a church decide? Would it be a vote of the membership or?
Good answer. Good. That is a great answer. You know, in a local church, we have 2 meetings. One is called a church council, and one is called a charge conference. Or, each one of those, if you just had the annual conference, charge conference. If you just did your charge conference, you do that every year, present your budget and all the programs you're going to do. If just those elected officials are there, you have to have 55% of those folk that vote yes to make a change. If it's a church conference and everybody is involved, they've got a percentage. They figured all this out. You've got to have 77% of the body to vote for it to make a change. So, yes, they've thought through all of that. They've got ways for the local church to make that decision. One of the things that we feel or understand, and I can go without saying this. Here we are as a church, from traditional all the way over to progressive, the most progressive, that we will have fall off. We will have churches, we will have individuals, because no matter what we decide, it's not going to be enough. And those people will go and find other ways to be faithful to who they are, how God has lived in their lives. And I think that's just a pretty honest way of looking at that. We also have what we call traditional compatibilists. They want to remain traditional, and their understanding of marriage is between one man and one woman. They want to stay traditional, but they're compatible to an extent with some of the progressive over here. Now, we have progressives that are absolutely, we want it all. We want it all. If we don't get it, we're out of here. But there are progressives that say, I'm a progressive compatibilist. I'm willing to listen and work this out, to figure out a way for all of us to live in faith and charity under the one thing. I see that happening. I see that happening on a local level in your local church, because some of you feel and think and have experienced God in different ways. I mean, we all have. God has shown God's self to me in many different ways, from the way you have experienced God and the way we read Scripture and how we understand that. And we're just saying, I'm hoping, my prayer is that to the world we can show them a new way. Like John Wesley, a way of grace to allow people to be different and to be able to let go of something that is going to be detrimental to my relationship with you. Richard, maybe we don't agree on how to cook eggs. I really kind of like mine over easy. But if you like yours fried or scrambled, okay, we can live in the same house and do that. No, but you see what I'm saying? My prayer is, because God is so diverse. When I think about the great banquet, when we all get to heaven, look at all of the people that are going to be there. So be it, God. Can we not do that here? Because the kingdom is here on earth, and we've just got to figure out a way to build it and to be faithful to one another and to have that witness of grace. Any last questions? It's hard work. I have sequestered myself between now and February because I am earnestly trying to figure out and to read and to hear other people's story and why one value, one view is so important to their faith that they can draw a line in the sand. That's whether it's traditionalist or whether it is progressive. And that's my prayer, and that's my focus. I think our particular delegation has felt that way, and that we are not going to vote as a block. We have been elected as an individual that people in our conference have valued and seen our life's work, and they trust us. And so on the delegation, we trust one another to allow them to make the decision that they need to make at this issue. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. When we met in November, you may recall there were two unofficial organizations preparing for the outcome of this. One is the Wesleyan Covenant Association. It is a very well-organized group that has been in the planning and organizational stage for the last several years. And it represents the very traditional conservative approach toward this issue. And it is already providing an opportunity for churches to say go to the right, for lack of a better way to describe it, to have a place to go. There's another group that formed in response to all of this called the Uniting Methodists. Not united, but uniting. And we've had representatives attend meetings of both of those, so there's familiarity with those, and we discussed that back in November. Next Sunday, John has a slide for us. There is a meeting that's been called on fairly short notice at Arbor Lawn United Methodist Church that represents the Uniting Methodist approach. It's available to anyone who might choose to go from 3 to 5 at Arbor Lawn, which is at 5000 Briarhaven in the Overton Park area, Fort Worth, just north of Interstate 20, just a block west of Hewlin Street. You don't need to ask permission. You don't need to make a reservation. If you'd like to go, just show up. I'm not sure my calendar is free next Sunday to be able to go. I had the chance to attend a Uniting Methodist event at White's Chapel with several of you. When was that, Pam? Was that back during the summer that we went? Yes. So I did want to share that for you. But I also hope you, and again, I speak only for myself, but I want you to know how secure I feel in having someone like Brenda Wier be a representative for me on this important issue. And I hope you will pray for her and pray for all the members of our delegation, not only from our annual conference, but for all across Methodism, because history is being written. And this is a very, very nerve-wracking time in some ways, but in other ways it's very exciting because we're getting to be a part of the writing of history. And so we're going to trust that God's going to be a part of this. And I thank you for coming today. If you are a part of the Vineyard Discipleship Group, be sure and see Doug Smith. And we'll see those of you who were here at 9 o'clock for festivities throughout the week. Katie Smith is going to be our speaker in the Oasis this week. And for those of you that hadn't been to church yet, we're going to rock and roll here at 11:11. Although, Brenda, I'm glad you mentioned when we all get to heaven. There's a great hymn. When you put up the tempo, it's toe tapping. And John Moran refuses to teach our band when we all get to heaven. And that's a part of the obstinance that I give you an orientation on. All right, so use your leverage and clout to get his attention, okay? Sing the wondrous love of Jesus. Sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us. So can you tell their excitement in this? When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. Hallelujah! When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory, the victory. John, you've been overruled on the 20th of January. Go in peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.